Hello, everybody. I am Donald Worster from the United States of America. I am an environmental historian, and I should tell you how I became an environmental historian first. Uh, I was born at the time of World War II, and I grew up in the great deserts of the American Southwest and also in the Great Plains, sort of like the Cerrado of Brazil, grasslands. And I became very impressed early on with the power of the natural world, the sky, climate, soils, plant life, all of those things always impressed me. I felt very drawn to the rivers flowing through the landscape. But it was not until the 1960s, when I was a graduate student studying at Yale University in New England, that these ideas or feelings began to become intellectualized. I became a scholar trying to understand the human impact and interaction with the natural world. I explain this in two ways. One, I was reading all the books of the early environmentalists, Rachel Carson, Aldo Leopold, Barry Commoner, Paul Ehrlich, on and on and on. I was reading all those people while I was a graduate student, supposed to be studying American history. But these books were the most interesting thing for me. Nobody in my classes talked about any of that. It was out there in the public. Demonstrations, political movements, Earth Day. But I began to ask myself, how can I bring these issues into the study of history? My professors could not do this for me. They were interested in intellectual history, political history, diplomatic history, social history to some extent, but no environment. That was for the sciences. So I started by deciding to write my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, on the history of ecology. There was history and there was ecology. I put them together and said, let's study this important science, which can change the way we do history. Let's study its history. Let's see what it meant and what it's become, how it has changed over time. That was my beginning. I taught one of the very first environmental history classes, I think, ever, to undergraduate students at Yale while I was still a graduate student. And then I moved on from there to become a professor and so on. In the United States, at least, I don't know about elsewhere, it was fairly easy, not real easy, but fairly easy to innovate, to come up with something new, not to have to follow the path of all the old professors. Of course, today I want everybody to follow the path of this old professor. But at that point, I thought this was amazing to be able to teach these subjects and develop something like it. And was not the only one. In the 1970s, mid-1970s, some of us in the United States joined together, not only me, but some others were leading this movement, to form a society for environmental history. Very small at first. Today it's grown to thousands, and it's taught in almost every American university. Someone is teaching environmental history today. And it's obviously become also a world event. Europeans, Latin Americans. Now I'm in China working with the Chinese to develop Chinese environmental history. That's the big challenge. 1.5 billion people on this huge land with this ancient history, thinking about environmental history, new ways to think about their past. So this has been an adventure. It has been a challenge, and I think we are making some success. Most historians still do not think this way. They are still slow. My goal is not simply to have a few people teaching it. I want to change the heads of everybody who teaches history. Everybody. I want them to think with an ecological paradigm, not the old paradigm that is completely centered only on humans and their history, their social relationships, etc. I think that might have been okay for the past, but it is not okay in the 21st century on this endangered planet. So that's my mission, is to change the thinking of all historians until they begin to think about the past as this interaction with the natural world, this dialectical relationship with nature. So let me describe my very first environmental history class, the one I mentioned, taught at Yale University back around 1970. I didn't know what to do. I had no plan, but I thought that on the beginning of the semester that I would get my students together and we would go out into the city, New Haven, Connecticut, walk together, and we would go looking for the harbor of New Haven, Connecticut. It's on Long Island Sound, less than 100 miles from New York City. Where is the harbor? Because I wanted them to see that the relationship with the sea and Long Island Sound had been very, very powerful and important. This was a fishing port, many things were happening there. But today, highways and oil tanks holding oil have completely taken over. And there's like a wall between the city and the sea. So we went looking for the harbor, and we found that it was very difficult to find it. That's how I started the subject, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. At first, I thought we should just study the New England part of the United States. And then it became, of course, U.S. history. I had to teach U.S. history from this point of view. Eventually, I moved to North America, Mexico and Canada, the United States. And today, I am beginning to teach a course that I call planetary environmental history, the whole planet. Not just the human part, but going back to the beginnings, the origins of the planet, the cycles that it's gone through, biodiversity's up and down, these parts. I think we need to know not just the history of our own country anymore, or our own region, but we must know the history of the planet. And we have to know how humans have fit into that. So I want to teach them today, students know a little bit about historical geology, historical evolution, biological evolution, that is, the development in Africa of the human species and other hominid species, the movement of people into East Asia and Eurasia, Europe, the discovery of the Americas. I'm convinced that now that we all ought to be teaching in environmental history two big things. One is the agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago and many other times in many places. But the agricultural revolution changed our relationships with nature radically, probably the most important change ever. We need to know this in environmental history. And secondly, the discoveries of the Western Hemisphere. Of course, it was inhabited much earlier, but I'm talking about around 1500, Christopher Columbus and all of those people. That was a revolutionary moment. We would not have capitalism, industrialization, the structure of power that we have in the world today, democracy, liberalism, these ideas, without that discovery of a world that was less inhabited, less crowded, more pristine, not pristine, but more pristine than Europe or Asia had been for a long, long time. So students ought to be able to see how these revolutions in the past that have shaped who we are had an environmental and ecological foundation. That's the way I would teach environmental history today. Not just the environmental history of Brazil or the United States. That's past. That's the old way. But beyond that, okay? Thank you.